Well, I've been interested of late in, about 1200 or so BC, the Eastern Mediterranean countries, Hittites and Egyptians, and I think the Phoenician coast of what's now loosely called the Holy Land, were all troubled by what they referred to as the sea people. Now, the sea may have meant specifically a sea, although it's always been taken to mean simply that they came from the sea. And one assumes the sea is therefore the Mediterranean, since that's what's common to all. And it's a mystery where they came from. The Egyptians identify the countries that they come from, 4 or 5 names, but it doesn't seem to really clear up what these names, which countries they refer to, which geographical regions. We're not clear, as far as I know. Well, a natural solution, if you're concerned about the good of all life, is to try and understand why a certain people are doing something. Why have they appeared and attacking the coasts? Is it like pirates in the modern world and in the ancient world that simply find their lot in the society they're in not to be good and turn to crime on the high seas? Just that these people are attacking coastal cities and ransacking them and presumably taking such food and wealth as they can grab. And increasingly, as time goes on, seem to be trying to settle in such pillaged regions. Well, I think we can say that Egypt at some point seems to have employed such people to fight for them. In other words, knew of their existence and related to them, and sure, had a pretty mighty battle against them, keeping them out of the delta. Not really successfully, because we find in time that they occupy the delta, and Egypt just reconciles itself to having lost that part of their land to them. Although there's some argument too that Egypt semi-agreed for them to stay. We come back to trying to understand these people. Why are they suddenly appearing? I say suddenly, in the course of history. Well, they're sea people. And interestingly, in I think one of the battles, it's pointed out that they've got women and household sort of things in their ships, in their boats. You see, they are, by the looks of it, a people that are on the move. Now, this can happen because of someone invading at home or some natural disaster, like famine or flood and so on. But they're equipped in boats, and there's many of them. It's a really formidable number, which suggests something bad has happened to them. We don't know from the histories that we can have any contact with of the nation states around the Mediterranean of any such major catastrophe that's causing this. So perhaps it's somewhere else. Well, they obviously have a ship technology, so they're coastal. The coastal people. Which coastal people may have had a catastrophe? Well, how about the Black Sea? You know, the Black Sea was at one time an inland lake, and then it looks as though with rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, whenever that was, and there seemed to be some argument now that it wasn't 12,000 years ago, it could have been as recent as 6,000 years ago. And as we know, the retreating of the ice is not done and finished with. It's still going on today. We are technically an Ice Age planet at present from the point of view of one of the continents is still covered in ice, Antarctica. And there was, before climate change, quite a lot of ice at the northern polar cap too. That's vanishing. Not only that, but the coast of the Black Sea, especially I think the southern coast, what we now think of as Turkey, or was it called Anatolia at the time, which I think is more or less the northern part of the Hittite kingdom, was and is a volcanic fault. In fact, the Bosporus, the sort of gateway into the Black Sea now, is following a fault line, and it's been shifting, and some dramatic volcanic activity in the past, especially in that area, and also in eastern part of the country too. But particularly the west and north, and right down to the Aegean Sea, the Greek Sea, if you like. So if something causes the Black Sea to rise in sea level, the peoples in there, in that coastline, have got a problem. And their solution may be to take to the sea and try and find another place to live. They're a migrating population. And they're seafarers. That narrow gateway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean may have been blocked for a while, may not have been. Perhaps the Mediterranean changed in sea level height. Perhaps the continuing overall decline of the ice on the planet was not all at once and finished, by about 6,000 BC, but in fact actually started to take place then. We got our timing wrong, and has not been smooth and continuous since. And therefore the Black Sea has not always been at some nice steady level during the second millennium BC, between 1 and 2000 BC. If we look at the Black Sea floor, we can see several shelves at which the sea has been in the past, simply by looking at the deltas of the rivers that have flowed into it. We have ruins of what we've classified as Bronze Age docks that are 100 meters depth in the water now, which would suggest either the sea level was lower at the time, or the whole basin has sunk in that area, at least. since the time those docks were used. Our best explanation of the sea people, as I see it, is something to do with Black Sea. Possibly the continual melting of the ice on the planet, giving a variable height to the ocean levels generally, or specifically volcanic action in that very volatile volcanic area of plate tectonics. We've good reason to believe that our carbon dating system is not terribly reliable when you get beyond 2,000 years, because we're assuming certain mix of carbon dating in the atmosphere to be constant, and its effect of change over time. And that's not at all reliable. In fact, it's very much affected by volcanic eruptions, and there was no shortage of those 10 to 15,000 years ago. Some major eruptions going on. Changes the amount of carbon and what the carbon is in the atmosphere. Changes the picture of what we think the historical timeline is. So I think the end of the last ice age was not really 12, 13,000 years ago, but much more like, well, probably 6,000 years ago. And from another point of view, it's still going on today. The ice is still vanishing. And we feel, planet-wise, at an alarming rate for our populations. And we daren't think of the havoc it would cause if all the southern polar ice melted and sea levels rose 200 feet across the planet. Would wipe out, well, far too many of our major cities and population areas. I don't mean to be climate phobic, but we are aware of the effect of climate on our civilizations. Major migrations of people are usually because something's pushed them, and it's usually natural disaster, famines, floods, not usually volcanic activity per se, wars and persecutions. I think the sea people may be the Black Sea people, and I think they had their families with them. And Pharaoh, whichever one it was, may well have been wise to give them refuge and employ them at some point in time. Or he may have felt he had no choice. And it certainly seems they had to tolerate the sea people being in the Delta for a long period of time. It's true that the last pharaoh battling with them seems to have been the end of the matter, for we don't hear of trouble with sea people after that date. So perhaps for once the Egyptian record may be reliable he did actually solve the problem from Egypt's point of view. And perhaps trade and prosperity started to improve again after the desolation that the sea people seem to have caused to the nations, especially around and beyond the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm not sure of my history here, but the power of the Persian kingdom eventually, and its control of Greece, until Alexander the Great, of course, may well have been the controlling factor of overall gradually increasing prosperity in the region. Of course, Alexander the Great wasn't called great from his enemies' points of view, including India, of course. And it goes through my mind, I wonder how much trouble the Greeks had way back then at 1200 BC odd with these sea people, because the Greeks themselves were great seafarers. And if these sea people were fleeing from the Black Sea, did the Hittite kingdom early on just let them through into the Mediterranean? Or were they the first to have no choice but let them through? Don't know. I am fascinated by that narrow gap into the Black Sea, and the notion of the Black Sea being an inland lake during the Ice Age. Interestingly, if it is a lake, inland lake for a while, although we see the Black Sea as potentially freshwater compared to the Mediterranean, if it's an inland lake long enough, it becomes extremely salty. Because, of course, the rivers continue flowing in but evaporating off. So while it's an inland lake, it could become very salty, and a higher salinity of the water means that the ice is less on the surface, offsetting a bit the fact that you're still in Ice Age or post-Ice Age conditions. While it's still a lake, it's still salty, and this affects the ice level. But anyway, overall, if the level of water starts to increase in the Dead Sea, we expect the weight to push the seabed down and drag the coastline a bit with it. So it's hard to tell whether changes are mainly due to an increased water rise or a dropping of the land anyway due to volcanic plate tectonics and shift along the fault lines. And there are many fault lines there, especially following the Dardanelles gap into the Aegean. Yeah, it's an interesting study, isn't it? Thank you, Dad.